Colonel Tom Parker was not a colonel. He was not American. His name was not Tom Parker. For 25 years, the man who controlled Elvis Presley's career, his finances, his films, and his future had built his entire relationship with the most famous man in the world on a foundation that would have destroyed everything if it had been discovered. Elvis Presley never knew. By the time the truth emerged, Elvis was already gone. Elvis Aaron Presley was born on January 8, 1935, in Tupelo, Mississippi, in a two-room house his father had built. The family was poor in the specific way of the rural Deep South, not occasionally short of money, but structurally without it, in a community where that condition was the norm rather than the exception. He grew up absorbing the music around him. Gospel from the First Assembly of God Church, country from the radio, rhythm and blues from the black neighborhoods his family lived adjacent to. By the time the Presleys moved to Memphis in 1948, when Elvis was 13, he had been carrying music inside him for years. What he did not yet have was anyone who understood what that music was worth, or what it would cost him when someone finally did. In the summer of 1954, Elvis Presley walked into Sun Records in Memphis and recorded "That's All Right" with producer Sam Phillips. The record went to local radio, and the response was immediate enough that Phillips knew he had something he could not categorize. What followed over the next year, a series of singles that blended country, gospel, and rhythm and blues into something that had no existing name, established Elvis as a regional phenomenon, and then something larger. By 1955, he was performing across the South to audiences whose response went beyond enthusiasm into something closer to chaos. Sam Phillips recognized that what he had found was too large for Sun Records to contain. The question of who would take it from there was about to be answered by a man Elvis had just met. Andreas van Kuijk was born on June 26, 1909, in Breda, in the Netherlands. Sometime in the late 1920s, he entered the United States without documentation. He built a career in carnival promotion and artist management under the name Tom Parker, acquiring an honorary title, Colonel, from a Louisiana governor in 1948. By 1955, he was managing country singer Hank Snow and operating at the edges of the music industry with a reputation for aggressive deal-making and total control over his clients. He met Elvis Presley that year. He recognized immediately what he was looking at. Within months, he had maneuvered himself into a management agreement and begun the process of separating Elvis from Sam Phillips, from his previous management, and from anyone else who might share influence over the most commercially valuable young performer in America. In November 1955, Colonel Tom Parker negotiated Elvis Presley's signing with RCA Victor, a deal that was, for the era, extraordinary in scale. RCA paid Sun Records $35,000 for Elvis's contract and back catalog. Parker took a management fee that started at 25% and would eventually reach 50% of everything Elvis earned. Not a standard industry arrangement, not a figure that other managers of comparable clients were taking. 50% of records, films, concerts, merchandise, licensing. For the next 22 years, every dollar Elvis Presley made was divided in half before it reached him. Parker justified the arrangement on the grounds of his promotional ability and industry relationships. What he did not disclose to Elvis, to RCA, or to anyone was the specific reason he needed absolute control over where Elvis went and what he did. Between 1956 and 1960, Colonel Tom Parker built a machine around Elvis Presley that was commercially without precedent. The record sold in numbers that the industry had no existing framework to process. The television appearances, Ed Sullivan, Milton Berle, Steve Allen, produced audience responses that television producers could not explain. When Elvis was drafted into the U.S. Army in 1958, Parker managed even that as a promotional event. When Elvis returned in 1960, Parker had a new direction prepared: Hollywood. Over the following decade, Elvis made 31 films. Most of them were built around a formula Parker had approved: light, commercial, profitable, and deliberately unchallenging. Musicians and producers who worked with Elvis during this period described an artist who wanted to do something different and a manager who consistently said no. The machine kept running. The question of who it was running for was not asked openly. Through the 1960s and into the 1970s, Elvis Presley received offers to perform internationally that were, by any measure, promoters in the United Kingdom, Japan, Australia, and across Europe proposed concerts and tours at figures that reflected his global standing. The Beatles had toured internationally. The Rolling Stones had toured internationally. Elvis Presley, who was by commercial measures larger than either, never left North America after his military service in West Germany ended in 1960. Every international proposal went to Colonel Tom Parker. Every one was declined. The reasons Parker gave varied. The logistics were too complex. The timing was wrong. The offers were not sufficient. Those around Elvis described his frustration as genuine, a performer who understood that his audience was global and who was being prevented from reaching it by the one man whose permission he needed. The reason Parker gave was never the real reason. Colonel Tom Parker could not leave the United States, not without risking everything. As an undocumented immigrant who had entered the country illegally and built an entire identity on a false name and fabricated background, any international travel carried the possibility of exposure, deportation, and the collapse of everything he had constructed. A passport application would require documentation he did not have. A border crossing would require papers he could not produce. So Elvis Presley, the most in-demand live performer on earth, did not tour internationally. Not because the offers weren't there, not because Elvis didn't want to go, because his manager could not go with him and could not explain why. The secret held for Parker's entire lifetime. Dutch researchers confirmed his true identity in records found after his death in 1997. What Elvis Presley's career might have looked like without Colonel Tom Parker's constraints is not a question with a definitive answer, but the outline is visible in what he was prevented from doing. International tours at the height of his fame, creative control over his film projects, a recording career driven by artistic ambition rather than commercial formula. Musicians who worked with Elvis consistently described a man of genuine musical intelligence who was systematically steered away from the work that interested him toward the work that was easiest to monetize. Parker also negotiated the sale of Elvis's recording royalties back to RCA for a one-time payment, a transaction that stripped the estate of ongoing income. When Elvis died in 1977, the estate that should have reflected 20 years of unparalleled commercial success was, in financial terms, nearly empty. By the early 1970s, Elvis Presley's career had narrowed to Las Vegas residencies and touring circuits that Parker could control entirely within the United States. The film career had ended. The creative ambitions had been deferred so many times they had largely stopped being voiced. Those close to Elvis during this period described increasing isolation, a man surrounded by people whose loyalty was to his comfort rather than his best interests, managed by a man whose primary concern was maintaining the arrangement that had made them both rich. Elvis's health deteriorated. The performances became inconsistent. The recording sessions produced material that those who loved his earlier work struggled to reconcile with what he had been. He died at Graceland on August 16, 1977. He was 42 years old. Parker continued to represent the estate until 1983, when a probate court investigation finally examined the terms of their arrangement and found them to have been unconscionable. The question of what Colonel Tom Parker was to Elvis Presley does not have a simple answer, and both sides of it are grounded in real evidence. Parker discovered Elvis Presley at a moment when no one else had understood what he was. He negotiated the RCA deal. He built the promotional infrastructure that made Elvis globally famous. Without Parker's aggression and industry knowledge, it is possible that Elvis's talent would never have found the platform it deserved. That is not a small thing. What Parker took in return, 50% of everything, international isolation, creative control, and ultimately a financial arrangement that left the estate depleted, was also real. The argument is not between a villain and a victim. It is between a man who gave something essential and took something that was not his to take. Both of those things happened. Neither cancels the other. Two men, one of the most consequential arrangements in the history of popular music. Colonel Tom Parker made Elvis Presley famous. Elvis Presley made Colonel Tom Parker rich. What each of them knew about the other, and what one of them was never allowed to know, shaped everything that followed. Did Parker make Elvis? Or did he limit him? Tell us in the comments below. And if you want more untold stories like this one, subscribe. There's more where that came from.